The cafeteria of Station Nexus buzzed with the usual mix of alien languages and universal translators working overtime. Captain Sarah Chun sat at her usual table, methodically working through what the station called nutrition paste, but what she privately thought of as barely edible slop. Around her, dozens of species from across the galaxy went about their daily routines, most giving the lone human a wide berth. It had been 6 months since first contact, and humans were still the newest addition to the Galactic Council. Sarah was part of the first wave of human diplomats and military advisors sent to learn about galactic society and prove that humanity deserved its place among the stars. Most days, she felt like she was walking on eggshells, carefully watching every word and action to avoid causing an intergalactic incident. The Zilani at the table next to her were having an animated discussion about trade routes, their crystalline forms chiming like wind bells as they communicated. Across the room, a group of Korthak engineers were bent over technical schematics, their 6 arms working in perfect coordination. The massive Gorvani ambassador sat alone, as usual, his plate-sized frame requiring specially reinforced furniture. Sarah had just reached for her water glass when her sleeve caught the edge of her meal tray. The whole thing tilted, sending her eating utensil sliding toward the floor. Without thinking, her hand shot out with lightning reflexes, fingers closing around the handle of the falling knife just inches from the ground. She straightened up, pleased with her quick catch, and set the utensil back on her tray. The reaction was immediate and terrifying. Every alien in the cafeteria had frozen. Conversations died mid-sentence. The Zilani's chiming stopped abruptly. Even the Gorvani had gone completely still, his massive eyes fixed on Sarah's hand. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity, broken only by the hum of the station's life support systems. Sarah looked around, confused by the sudden attention. "What?" she asked, her voice carrying in the unnaturally quiet space. That single word seemed to break whatever spell had fallen over the room. The Zilani at the next table suddenly scrambled backward, their chairs scraping against the floor with sharp screeches. One of them let out what could only be described as a shriek of terror. The Korthak engineers abandoned their work entirely, all 6 arms flailing as they rushed toward the exits. Even the massive Gorvani, despite his size advantage, was slowly backing away from Sarah's table. "I don't understand," Sarah said, standing up and taking a step forward. This only made things worse. Half the remaining aliens in the cafeteria bolted for the doors, while the others pressed themselves against the far walls as if trying to meld with the metal bulkheads. The cafeteria, which moments ago had been filled with the normal sounds of dozens of beings going about their day, was now echoing with the sounds of panic. Emergency protocols activated, sealing blast doors and triggering alerts throughout the station. Sarah found herself alone in the center of the chaos, still holding the knife she had caught, completely bewildered by what had just happened. Commander Vexhai, the station's Trilaxian security chief, burst through the main entrance with a full security team. His 4 eyes immediately locked on Sarah, and even through his professional composure, she could see fear flickering in his gaze. His tentacles, usually a calm blue-green, had shifted to alarmed orange patterns. "Human Chun," Vexhai said carefully, his voice amplified through his translator, but carrying none of his usual authority. "Please place the weapon down slowly." "Weapon?" Sarah looked down at the eating utensil in her hand. It was barely sharp enough to cut the synthetic protein in her meal. This is just a dinner knife." The security team, made up of various species, all took a collective step backward. One of the Korthak officers made a sound that the translator rendered as, "Oh, blessed ancestors, it speaks so casually of the blade." Sarah was beginning to realize that she had stumbled into something much bigger than a simple misunderstanding. The fear in the room was real, palpable, and completely focused on her. More specifically, on the simple piece of cutlery in her hand. "Commander Vexhai," she said slowly, "I think there's been some kind of mistake. This is just eating equipment. I caught it when it fell off my tray. That's all. Caught it." Vexhai's translator struggled with the concept, producing several beeping sounds before settling on the translation. You intercepted a falling blade? With your bare hand? Well, yes. It's not that difficult. Basic reflexes, really. The security team exchanged what could only be described as horrified glances. One of them, a tall, insectoid being Sarah didn't recognize, began backing toward the exit while keeping all four of its eyes fixed on her. Basic reflexes, Vexhai repeated, and Sarah was pretty sure the translator was working overtime to convey the mixture of disbelief and terror in his voice. We have a situation involving the human representative. Sarah felt her stomach sink. 6 months of careful diplomacy, and she had apparently caused an intergalactic incident by catching a piece of cutlery. She had no idea what she had done wrong, but judging by the continued, fearful stares from the aliens around her, it was something significant. "Commander," she said carefully, "could someone please explain to me what just happened?" Vexhai's tentacles shifted to what Sarah had learned indicated deep thought mixed with anxiety. "Human Shun, I believe we need to have a very serious conversation about human capabilities and galactic safety protocols. What you just demonstrated, it's not supposed to be possible." The weight of his words settled over Sarah like a cold blanket. She was beginning to understand that humanity's introduction to galactic society was about to become much more complicated. The council chambers had never seen an emergency session convened so quickly. Representatives from dozens of species filled the circular amphitheater, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony of sounds that the universal translators struggled to process. Sarah sat in the center of it all, still wearing her casual station clothes, feeling more like a specimen under examination than a diplomatic representative. High Counselor Zephyr, an ancient being whose species had been among the founders of the Galactic Council, called for order with a sound that resonated through the chamber like a bell. The Etherian's form was difficult to focus on directly, seeming to shift between states of matter, but their authority was unquestioned. "We are gathered," Zephyr announced, "to address an incident involving the human representative that has raised significant concerns about species classification and safety protocols." Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her specially designed chair. Around her, she could see representatives whispering among themselves, many casting nervous glances in her direction. The fear from the cafeteria hadn't dissipated. If anything, it seemed to have intensified. Commander Vexhai took the floor, his tentacles now a nervous purple shade. "Honored Council, at approximately 1400 station time, Human Shun was observed intercepting a falling blade weapon with her bare hand. The speed and precision of this action exceeded all known capabilities for level 3 civilizations." A murmur ran through the chamber. Sarah could hear fragments of translation. "Impossible. Violation of physics. Threat assessment." "Excuse me," Sarah said, standing up. The chamber immediately fell silent. "But I think there's been a massive misunderstanding. I didn't do anything extraordinary. I just caught a knife that was falling off my plate. Any human could have done the same thing." The reaction was immediate. Half the council members recoiled, as if she had announced she could breathe fire. The Gorvani representative actually stood up and took several steps backward, despite being 3 times Sarah's size. "Any human," squeaked the delegate from the Pixari collective, their tiny form trembling on their platform. "You mean this is common among your species?" "Of course it's common," Sarah replied, genuinely confused by their terror. "We play sports where we catch things moving much faster than a falling knife. Baseball, cricket, tennis. Children learn to catch balls when they're barely old enough to walk." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah could see the council members exchanging looks that needed no translation. Pure, unadulterated fear. High Counselor Zephyr's form solidified slightly, a sign of deep concentration. "Human Shun, when your species was evaluated for council membership, you were classified as a level 3 civilization. This classification was based on your technology, social structure, and observed physical capabilities. What you described suggests we may have made a grave error." "I don't understand," Sarah said. "What's wrong with catching something that's falling?" "Child," rumbled the massive Gorvani ambassador, his voice like distant thunder. In the 50,000 years of galactic civilization, only 3 species have ever demonstrated the ability to intercept moving objects with such precision and speed. All 3 were classified as Level 7 apex predator species. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Level 7 was the highest classification in the galactic system, reserved for species so dangerous that they were typically quarantined to their home systems or, in extreme cases, eliminated entirely. But that's ridiculous, she protested. Humans aren't apex predators. We're omnivores. We farm, we build cities, we create art. We're peaceful. Peaceful, the word came from Delegate Martok of the hegemony, their translated voice dripping with disbelief. Your species has been in continuous conflict for your entire recorded history. Your planet is covered in weapons capable of destroying all life on it multiple times over. Well, yes, but your literature and entertainment media is filled with stories of violence and warfare, continued another delegate. Your competitive activities involve physical combat, high-speed pursuits, and scenarios that would be considered torture by most civilized species. Sarah opened her mouth to object, then realized she couldn't really argue with that assessment. From an outside perspective, human society probably did look pretty violent. The reflexes you just demonstrated, Commander Vexhai added, consulting his datapad, show reaction times approximately 15 times faster than the galactic average. The precision required to catch a falling object without looking directly at it suggests spatial awareness and motor control that should be impossible for a non-predator species. But we evolved as persistent hunters, Sarah tried to explain. We ran down prey over long distances. We needed good reflexes and hand-eye coordination to throw spears accurately. The chamber erupted in alarm chatter. The translator picked up fragments. Persistence hunters, endurance predators. They run their prey to death. High Counselor Zephyr raised their hand for silence. Human Chun, are you telling us that your entire species evolved as pursuit predators? That you literally hunted other creatures until they collapsed from exhaustion? Well, when you put it like that, it sounds worse than it was, Sarah said weakly. But, yes, that's basically accurate. We can run for hours without stopping. Most animals can only sprint for short distances before they need a rest. The silence that followed was even more profound than before. Sarah could practically feel the collective realization washing over the chamber. They weren't looking at a peaceful representative of a young civilization. They were staring at a member of a species that had evolved to be one of the most efficient killing machines in the known galaxy. Your species, said the Trilaxian delegate slowly, can pursue prey across vast distances, never tiring, never giving up, until the target collapses from exhaustion and terror. That's a very dramatic way to put it, Sarah said, but essentially accurate. And you can intercept fast-moving objects with casual ease. Any healthy human can, yes. And your planet is armed with weapons of mass destruction that you've pointed at your own cities. We prefer to think of them as deterrents, but yes. The council members began talking among themselves in urgent, hushed tones. Sarah caught fragments of conversation through the translators. Reclassification, immediate quarantine, code red threat assessment. High Counselor Zephyr's form began to shift more rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. Human Chun, I'm afraid we need to suspend this session while we review humanity's classification status. In the meantime, you will need to remain in protective custody while we determine the appropriate response. Protective custody? Sarah stood up quickly, and half the chamber flinched away from her. Are you seriously going to imprison me because I caught a falling knife? For everyone's safety, Vexhai said apologetically, including your own. If humanity has been misclassified as severely as it appears, there are protocols that must be followed. Some species may view humans as an existential threat. Sarah looked around the chamber at the fearful faces staring back at her. 6 months of careful diplomacy had just been destroyed by basic human reflexes. She was beginning to understand that humanity's place in the galaxy was about to become much more precarious than anyone had anticipated. This is insane, she muttered. Unfortunately, the translators picked up her comment and broadcast it to the entire chamber. The words sent another ripple of alarm through the assembled delegates. Even quiet expressions of frustration from a potential apex predator were apparently cause for concern. Sarah realized she was in much deeper trouble than she had thought possible. Sarah's temporary quarters were comfortable enough, but the heavy security presence outside her door made it clear she was a prisoner rather than a guest. 3 different species of guards rotated shifts, each maintaining a respectful but wary distance. They had even modified the room's food delivery system so she wouldn't have access to any eating utensils that could be considered weapons. She had been given access to the Galactic database to better understand the situation, as Commander Vexhai had diplomatically put it. What she discovered in those files made her stomach churn with growing dread. The classification system was more than just bureaucratic categories. Level 7 species were subject to strict containment protocols. They were banned from most space stations, prohibited from colonizing worlds with existing populations, and their movements were tracked constantly. In the worst cases, Level 7 species had been completely eliminated when they were deemed too dangerous to coexist with galactic civilization. The 3 existing Level 7 species made for disturbing reading. The Vorthak were silicon-based predators whose reflexes were so fast they could snatch projectiles out of the air mid-flight. They were confined to a single world under permanent quarantine. The hegemony had glassed their planet from orbit rather than risk contact. The Krex TI had been shape-shifting hunters who could perfectly mimic any species they encountered. They had been discovered infiltrating multiple worlds simultaneously, apparently planning a coordinated strike against galactic civilization. The response had been swift and final. No Krex TI had been seen for over 1,000 years. The third case was the Devourers, whose name needed no translation. They had consumed 3 entire systems before being stopped. The Galactic Fleet had turned their homeworld into an asteroid field to prevent any possibility of their return. Sarah was studying these files when her door chimed. Commander Vexhai entered, followed by a being she didn't recognize. The newcomer was tall and thin, with golden skin that seemed to reflect light in impossible ways. Their movements were precise and controlled, speaking to someone accustomed to danger. Human Chun, Vexhai said formally. I'd like you to meet Combat Analyst Curious H of the Aurelian Fleet Command. They specialize in threat assessment for dangerous species. Curious H studied Sarah with eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of her appearance and posture. Fascinating, they said, their voice carrying harmonics that the translator struggled to render. You appear completely relaxed, yet I can sense the coiled potential in your musculature. Even at rest, you maintain perfect balance and readiness to move in any direction. I'm sitting in a chair, Sarah said flatly. Yes, but observe how you sit. Weight distributed evenly, feet positioned for immediate movement, hands positioned to defend or attack. This is not conscious behavior, is it? This is how your species naturally exists. Sarah looked down at herself, realizing with uncomfortable awareness that Curious H was absolutely right. She had unconsciously positioned herself for maximum mobility and response capability. It's just comfortable this way. Exactly my point, Curious H said, settling into their own chair with movements that Sarah recognized as similarly controlled. Your species has weaponized comfort. Even your relaxation is tactical. Commander Vexhai activated a holographic display that showed Sarah's incident in the cafeteria, slowed down, and analyzed frame by frame. We've been studying the recording of your reflexive action. The analysis is troubling. Sarah watched herself catch the falling knife in slow motion. From this perspective, she could see what had terrified the aliens so badly. Her hand had moved with mechanical precision, tracking the knife's fall and intercepting it without her even looking directly at it. Her fingers had closed around the handle at exactly the right moment, with exactly the right grip. Your reaction time, Curious H noted, was 0.12 seconds from when the knife began to fall to when you completed the catch. For comparison, the fastest recorded reflexes among galactic species average 1.8 seconds for a similar task. The precision is equally concerning, Vexhai added. You intercepted a falling object while engaged in another activity, without conscious thought or direct visual tracking. Your spatial awareness and motor control suggest neural processing capabilities far beyond what we categorized. But humans aren't the fastest species on Earth, Sarah protested. We're not even the strongest. Cheetahs are faster, elephants are stronger, eagles have better vision. We're just adaptable. Adaptable. Yes, that may be the most terrifying word in your vocabulary. The other level 7 species were powerful in specific ways. The Vorthak were fast, the Krextii were deceptive, the Devourers were destructive. But they were specialists. You're describing a generalist apex predator. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. What do you mean? A species that isn't the best at any one thing, but is extremely good at everything, Vexhai explained. Fast enough to catch projectiles, strong enough to damage most materials, intelligent enough to use complex tools, social enough to coordinate in groups, and adaptable enough to function in any environment. We've been reviewing your species' history, Kira SH continued, pulling up new displays. In just a few 100,000 years, your species has spread across every continent on your world, adapted to every climate from frozen tundra to burning desert, and developed tools ranging from simple clubs to weapons that can crack planets. The holographic display showed human expansion across Earth, then transitioned to images of human technology, warfare, and space exploration. Seen from this perspective, human development looked less like natural evolution and more like an unstoppable invasion force preparing to expand into the galaxy. Your competitive activities are particularly illuminating, Curious H said. You engage in complex team combat scenarios for entertainment. You race vehicles at speeds that would be fatal to most species. You voluntarily enter confined spaces with dangerous predators and attempt to dominate them with your bare hands. You're talking about sports, Sarah said weakly. I'm talking about combat training disguised as recreation. Your species practices warfare constantly, calling it fun. You've turned preparation for violence into a cultural cornerstone. Commander Vexhai leaned forward, his tentacles a worried shade of gray. Human Shun, we need to understand. Is this level of capability common among your species? Are you representative of average human abilities? Sarah thought about the question seriously. Was she average? She had played sports in school, served in the military, kept herself in decent shape. She wasn't an elite athlete or a special forces soldier. She was, by human standards, completely ordinary. Yes, she said finally. I'm probably slightly above average physically, but not by much. Most humans my age could have done what I did in the cafeteria. The silence that followed was heavy with implication. If Sarah was average, then humanity represented a potential threat that the galaxy had never encountered before. Not a species of individual super soldiers, but an entire civilization of beings with apex predator reflexes, intelligence, and adaptability. There's more, Kursage said quietly. We've been analyzing your psychological profiles. Your species shows remarkable resistance to stress, trauma, and pain. You continue to function effectively even under conditions that would incapacitate most other beings. This suggests not just physical adaptation for hunting, but psychological adaptation for warfare. We call it resilience, Sarah said. It's considered a positive trait. To you, perhaps. To the rest of the galaxy, it suggests a species that has been shaped by constant conflict into the perfect warriors. You don't just hunt your prey to exhaustion. You outlast your enemies in every way that matters. Sarah stared at the data displays, showing human capabilities compared to galactic averages. The implications were staggering. Humanity hadn't just been misclassified. They had been catastrophically underestimated. She was beginning to understand why the Council was terrified. So what happens now? She asked. Commander Vexhai and Curious H exchanged a look that needed no translation. That, Vexhai said slowly, depends on humanity's response to our new assessment. The emergency session had been called back into order, but the atmosphere in the council chambers was markedly different. Where before there had been nervous energy and fear, now there was the cold tension of beings preparing for war. Several delegations had already departed the station entirely, unwilling to remain in the same system as a potential level 7 threat. Those who remained had positioned themselves as far from Sarah as the chamber's configuration allowed. High Counselor Zephyr's form had stabilized into a more solid state, indicating the gravity of the situation. "The analysis is complete," they announced, their voice carrying the weight of galactic authority. "The evidence is overwhelming. Humanity must be reclassified as a level 7 apex predator species, effective immediately." The announcement sent ripples of alarm through the assembled delegates, even though most had expected this conclusion. Level 7 reclassification meant that humanity would be subject to the most severe restrictions in galactic law. It also meant that preemptive action might be considered necessary. "The question before us now," Zephyr continued, "is how to proceed. Humanity has already begun expanding into galactic space. They have colonies on 14 worlds and ships throughout this sector. The threat they represent cannot be contained through traditional quarantine methods." Sarah stood up slowly, acutely aware that every movement she made was being analyzed for potential threats. "May I speak?" The request caused immediate tension. Several delegates activated personal defense systems, energy fields shimmering around their forms. Others began backing toward the exits. Even asking permission to speak was apparently considered threatening behavior from a level 7 species. "You may," Zephyr said after a long pause, "but we must ask that you remain in your designated area and avoid any sudden movements." "This is insane," Sarah said, keeping her voice level despite her frustration. "You're talking about treating my entire species like a threat because I caught a falling piece of cutlery. Yes, humans are physically capable, but we're not monsters. We want to be part of galactic civilization, not destroy it." "Your intentions may be benevolent," rumbled the Gorvani ambassador, "but your capabilities remain unchanged." The other level 7 species also claimed peaceful intentions initially. "The Crex TI approached us as refugees seeking shelter," added the Trilaxian delegate. "The Vorthak offered to share their technology in exchange for trade partnerships. The Devourers initially presented themselves as explorers and scientists." Sarah felt a chill of realization. "You're saying that every level 7 species has started as apparent friends?" "Every single one," Curious H confirmed from their position near the security station. "It appears to be a consistent pattern. Apex predator species invariably infiltrate galactic society through diplomatic channels before revealing their true nature." "But that's just—" Sarah started, then stopped. From the Council's perspective, it probably did look exactly like the previous threats. A powerful species making first contact, claiming peaceful intentions, and gradually revealing capabilities that far exceeded their initial assessments. "The pattern is undeniable," Zephyr said. "First contact through diplomatic channels. Rapid integration into galactic society. Gradual revelation of capabilities that suggest previous deception." And then they didn't need to finish the sentence. The file Sarah had read made the end of that pattern clear enough. "So you're going to destroy us," Sarah said quietly. "We are considering our options," Zephyr replied carefully. "The safety of galactic civilization must be our primary concern." "What if we voluntarily accepted restrictions?" Sarah asked desperately. "Monitoring, limited expansion, whatever you need to feel safe." The Vorthak offered similar compromises, Curious H noted. It was considered a delaying tactic while they prepared for expansion. "Besides which," added the Pixari delegate, "how could such restrictions be enforced? Your species demonstrates capabilities that make conventional containment impossible. You could potentially infiltrate any world, overcome any defense system, outmaneuver any pursuit." Sarah realized with growing horror that they were right. Human special forces had trained for exactly those scenarios. Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, and similar units regularly practiced infiltration, sabotage, and survival in hostile environments. From the Council's perspective, every human special forces unit looked like an advance invasion force. "There's one other option," Zephyr said slowly. "Complete voluntary isolation. Humanity withdraws from all galactic space, returns to your home system, and accepts permanent quarantine." "That's not fair," Sarah protested. "You're asking us to give up the stars because we have good reflexes." "It's not just reflexes," Curious H interrupted, projecting new data displays. "We've been analyzing human social structures, and the patterns are deeply concerning. Your species organizes into hierarchical groups optimized for warfare. You maintain multiple competing power structures that regularly engage in conflict, keeping your population in a constant state of combat readiness." "You're describing countries and politics," Sarah said. "I'm describing a species that has evolved perfect institutional frameworks for conquest and expansion. Your countries are essentially competing military organizations that have turned your entire world into a training ground for large-scale conflict." Sarah wanted to argue, but the evidence was overwhelming. Human history was largely a series of wars, conquests, and territorial disputes. Even during peaceful periods, nations maintained standing armies and intelligence services. The Cold War had literally been decades of preparation for a conflict that thankfully never came. "Your cultural artifacts confirm this assessment," continued another delegate. "Your literature, films, and games consistently focus on conflict, survival, and domination. Your heroes are warriors. Your stories celebrate victory over enemies, and your entertainment simulates combat scenarios. We also have art, music, philosophy, all of which are secondary to your primary cultural focus on warfare and competition. Even your nonviolent activities are structured as competitions with winners and losers." Sarah felt the walls closing in around her. Every aspect of human civilization that she considered normal and healthy was being reinterpreted as evidence of humanity's threat potential. The worst part was that she couldn't really argue with their assessment. Humans did seem to turn everything into competition, and human history was indeed largely defined by conflict. "The decision cannot be delayed much longer," Zephyr announced. "Humanity's rapid expansion and the revelation of their true capabilities presents an immediate threat to galactic security. We must choose between quarantine and preemptive action." "How long do I have?" Sarah asked. "The fleet is already mobilizing," Curious H said quietly. "If humanity cannot provide acceptable assurances within the next standard cycle, the Council will vote on immediate intervention." Sarah felt her heart sink. A standard cycle was roughly equivalent to a week in Earth time. 7 days for humanity to somehow convince a terrified galaxy that they weren't the next great threat to civilization. "There is one possibility," Zephyr said after a long pause. "If humanity can demonstrate definitive proof that your species poses no threat to galactic civilization, the Council might consider alternative arrangements." "What kind of proof?" "That remains to be determined. But it would need to be compelling enough to overcome 40,000 years of precedent regarding Level 7 species." As the session adjourned and the delegates filed out, many casting fearful glances in her direction, Sarah realized the magnitude of the task ahead. She had to find a way to prove that humanity deserved a place among the stars, despite possessing all the characteristics of a species that the galaxy had learned to fear above all others. The clock was ticking, and the stakes couldn't be higher. One way or another, the next week would determine whether humanity's future lay among the stars or ended in nuclear fire. Sarah spent 3 sleepless days poring over every piece of data she could access about humanity, galactic history, and the previous Level 7 species. The answer, when it finally came to her, was so obvious she almost missed it entirely. It was hidden in a single line buried deep in the Crex TI incident files. They never asked for help. Commander Vexhai and Combat Analyst Curious H escorted her back to the chambers, where a smaller group of representatives had assembled. The main galactic fleet was now less than 2 days away from human space. Honored Council, Sarah began, standing in the center of the chamber. I've found the proof you requested. The evidence that humanity is different from the previous Level 7 threats. Present your evidence, High Counselor Zephyr said, their form rippling with skeptical energy. The difference isn't in what we are, Sarah said, activating the holographic display. It's in what we do when we encounter problems we can't solve ourselves. The display showed comparative data from all previous Level 7 first contacts. The Vort Hack, Krex TI, and Devourers all approached the galaxy with offers. Trade agreements, technology sharing, territorial negotiations. They positioned themselves as having something to give. As did humanity initially, pointed out the Gorvani ambassador. Yes, but there's a crucial difference. Within 6 months of first contact, humanity did something none of the others ever did. Sarah pulled up communication logs from human diplomatic missions. We asked for help. The chamber fell silent as delegates examined the data. Sarah highlighted dozens of instances where human representatives had requested assistance, advice, or collaboration. Help with medical research for diseases that affect multiple species. Help understanding galactic trade regulations. Help with terraforming technologies that could benefit everyone. Help with translation protocols for our more complex languages. This proves nothing, the Trilaxian delegate argued. Requests for assistance could be part of an intelligence-gathering operation. Could be, Sarah agreed. But look at the pattern of what we asked for help with. She highlighted specific requests. Treatment for a rare disease that affects only one small human population. Agricultural techniques for a type of soil that exists on only 3 human colonies. Psychological counseling protocols for humans suffering from deep space isolation syndrome. Kira SH studied the data intently. These requests, they provide no strategic advantage. Exactly. We asked for help with problems that were specifically ours, that affected only us, that gave us no advantage in any potential conflict. We asked for help because we needed help, not because we wanted intelligence or technology. Furthermore, Sarah continued, bringing up more recent data. When we received that help, we shared the solutions freely. The agricultural techniques we learned were immediately published in open scientific journals. The medical treatments were added to galactic databases. The counseling protocols were shared with any species dealing with similar issues. The chamber began to buzz with quiet conversation as delegates examined the evidence. Sarah could see some of them beginning to understand her point. Apex predator species, she said, don't ask for help because they believe they shouldn't need it. They certainly don't share solutions to their problems because that would give away potential advantages. But humans do both constantly because we evolved not just as predators, but as cooperative predators. Cooperative predators? High Counselor Zephyr's form solidified with interest. Humans are pack hunters, not solitary ones. We succeed through cooperation, not domination. Our greatest strength isn't our individual capabilities. It's our ability to work together and share knowledge. Even our competitive nature serves this purpose. It drives us to improve each other. Sarah activated a new display showing human social structures. Yes, we organize into competing groups, but look at what happens during crises. The groups immediately cooperate against the common threat. Our competing military organizations have a history of allying against larger dangers. Our constant warfare is actually constant preparation to defend each other. The pattern of requesting assistance continues even now, Kira SH observed, studying the recent data. Human colonies regularly ask for help from neighboring systems, regardless of the species involved. Because we understand that survival depends on community, Sarah said. The previous Level 7 species saw other civilizations as prey or obstacles. Humans see them as potential pack members. Commander Vexhai spoke up for the first time during the session. This is a compelling argument, but how can we be certain it's accurate? How do we know this isn't simply a more sophisticated form of infiltration? Sarah had been prepared for this question. Test us. Test you how? Give us a problem we can't solve alone. something that requires cooperation with multiple species, something that has no strategic value, but significant moral importance. If we're what I claim we are, we'll ask for help and share whatever solutions we develop. The chamber fell into intense discussion. Sarah could see delegates arguing among themselves, some clearly convinced by her argument, others remaining skeptical. The debate continued for nearly an hour before Zephyr called for order. "We have a proposal," the High Counselor announced. "There is a situation that meets your criteria. The Refuge of Memories." Sarah had never heard the term, but the reaction from the assembled delegates told her it was significant. Several beings made what appeared to be gestures of respect or mourning. The Refuge of Memories is a collection of artifacts from extinct civilizations, Zephyr explained. It's housed on a station in the neutral zone, maintained by volunteers for various species. The station is failing, and the artifacts are deteriorating beyond our ability to preserve them. We haven't been able to solve the problem because it requires technologies and knowledge from dozens of different species, Curious H added. No single civilization has all the necessary expertise. The station has no strategic value, Vexai noted. It's purely a cultural preservation effort. Saving it would benefit everyone but advantage no one. Sarah understood immediately. It was the perfect test. You want us to help save artifacts from dead civilizations, using technologies we don't possess, solving problems we can't handle alone. More than that, Zephyr said, we want you to coordinate the effort, bring together the necessary species, organize the work, and ensure that any solutions developed are shared freely with everyone involved. If you succeed, the Gorvani ambassador rumbled, and you do so through cooperation rather than domination, it would provide strong evidence that humanity is indeed different from previous Level 7 species. And if we fail, the silence that followed made the answer clear. How much time do we have? Sarah asked. The fleet will hold position for 60 standard cycles, Zephyr announced. If the refuge project succeeds and humanity demonstrates genuine cooperative behavior, we will reconsider our assessment. As Sarah was escorted back to her quarters to begin coordinating humanity's most important test, she felt a mixture of hope and terror. They had been given a chance to prove themselves, but the task ahead was staggering. Saving a failing station full of priceless artifacts would require exactly the kind of cooperation and resource sharing that made humans different from the galaxy's previous threats. The next 60 days would determine whether humanity's future lay in cooperation or isolation. Sarah knew that every human in the galaxy was now depending on their ability to do what they did best, work together to solve an impossible problem. The real test wasn't whether they could save the refuge of memories. The test was whether they could prove that humanity's greatest weapon was not their predatory capabilities, but their instinctive drive to ask for help and share their solutions with anyone who needed them. Sarah opened her communications console and began composing the most important message of her life, a call to every human colony, ship, and outpost in the galaxy. They had work to do, and humanity had never failed at working together when it truly mattered.